Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Shabbos Daf Kuf Lamed Vav primarily discusses the subject of a child that is born, a human or an animal, a fetus that is born, and it does not live to a viable age. There's a certain minimum age that it has to live in order for it to be considered fully living. Less than that, we would view it as an extended stillborn. And there's a number of halachos that are relevant to that, and the Gemara is going to discuss that issue. And then at the end of the daf, we'll get into the subject of someone who is not of a clear gender and how that applies to other halachos. So the Gemara begins with a brisa. It's a statement of Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. The Gemara is later going to want to know if anybody argues. But he says that if you look at the halachos of a bechor, for a human bechor, he's redeemed when he's 30 days old. So Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says that shows that less than 30 days old, he's not considered to be a viable life. And you cannot be confirmed that he is living and that he is established until he reaches 30 days old. Less than that, you don't know if he's going to live, and he might end up being a stillborn up to 30 days old. Now, for an animal, that applies up to 8 days old. What's the reason that you say that for an animal? Because an animal can only be brought as a carbon once it's 8 days old. A human child can be redeemed as a bechor when it's 30 days old. So those are the ages. 30 days for a human makes it viable. 8 days for a child makes it viable. So the Gemara asks right away, then how can you do a bris milah for a human child on the 8th day? Maybe it's not going to live to 30 days and it won't be viable. So the question over here is, are we talking about a child who was carried to full gestation of 9 months, or are we talking about 1 to 8 months? We had seen in the daf yesterday and the day before that 8 months is not viable. So what is this referring to? So Rashi understands that we never really know if the child is an 8-monther or a 9-monther, because we don't know exactly when he conceived. But if you knew for certain that it was a 9-month child, then you wouldn't have to worry. You could assume that it was viable even less than 30 days old. The question over here is, how could you do a bris on any child? You never really know for sure if it's going to live 30 days, and it may have been an 8-monther. What do you know? So the Gemara's question again is, how could you do a bris milah? The Gemara answers, because either way you don't have a problem. If it's a viable child, so then why can't you do the bris milah? It's chayiv in a bris, and you could be mechal Shabbos for the bris. If it's not viable, then it's not a life. It's just a piece of meat, technically. So you're cutting a dead piece of flesh when you do the bris. That's not chil Shabbos at all. So Gemara says if that's true, so when you have a situation where you really don't know if it's an 8-monther or if it's not an 8-monther, where you have actual concern that it might be an 8-monther, we say that you can't do a bris milah. Because if it's an 8-month-old, if it was born in the 8th month, then it's not viable. So what's the problem? It's not chil Shabbos. Right? You said it's just like cutting a piece of meat. So the Gemara says, you're right. It is. And there is no problem doing a bris milah for a potentially 8-month born child. The problem is, according to Rabbi Eliezer, we had seen earlier that you can do machshirei milah. You can prepare for the bris milah. You can heat up water. You can make a knife. You can carry it through a rishus rabbim. All those things are malachos. So according to him, we have to learn that you cannot do these things if it's a possible 8-month-old child. Those things you can't do because it may be an 8-monther and not be viable. Okay, we now refer back to the statement of Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, and we want to know if anybody argues on him, and if people do argue on him, what's the halacha? So first of all, the Gemara tries to show that there is a machlokes tanaim about the subject. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel again had said that any human within 30 days of birth or animal within 8 days of birth is not considered viable. It's not considered living yet. So Abaye wants to say this is a machlokes tanaim, and it comes from a brisa about shchita. Again, let's review. Shchita, if you shacht a perfectly living, healthy animal, then the animal is kosher to eat, and this is referring to a kosher species, of course. The meat is kosher to eat, and the meat is not a tamei. If, however, it is a living animal, but it is treif, it has a fatal injury or disease, then the meat is not kosher, but it's still not tamei. The shchita makes it that the meat won't be tamei. If, however, an animal is killed or loses its life without shchita at all, then the meat is not kosher and it is tamei. So the Gemara brings a brisa that has a machlokes about an animal that dies within 8 days of its birth. So we are understanding a pasuk that says "V'chiyamus min abehem asher hi lachem la'achla." The last word here, la'achla, is a drasha. Actually, every word here is a drasha. But the question is, what is the last word coming to teach us? La'achla. Gemara says it's a brisa. It's a machlokes between the Rabbanan, who say it's coming to teach you that this animal, if it's slaughtered within 8 days of his birth, is tamei. It's like an avela. And Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, who say that it is tahar. It's not kosher, but it's tahar. It's like a treifa. So the Gemara says they're probably arguing about the Rav Shimon ben Gamliel's halacha. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel had said that within 8 days, the animal was considered to be dead meat. So one of them agrees with him, and therefore it's nevela, and one of them does not agree with him. So Gemara says, but if that's true, if that's what the argument is about, so then why are they arguing about whether it's tamei or not? They should argue about whether it's kosher or not. If it's not considered to be a dead animal, if it's a viable animal, it should be kosher. It should be the highest level. Why do you have to say that it's considered to be, that it's a machlokes, whether it's treif or nevela? Why are they arguing about tumah? Must be the argument is not about Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. The argument is about something else. Everybody agrees with Rav Shimon ben Gamliel that this animal is we're assuming that it's not viable. We're assuming that it's going to die. And according to Yehuda and Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. So, according to, again, who is it? Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. This animal is currently living, but it's going to die. That's like a treifa. A treifa is currently living and it's going to die, and therefore it is tahar if you shecht it, but it's not kosher. According to the Rabbanan, it's different than a treifa. A treifa was kosher and healthy at some point. This animal was never healthy. It was born in a state where it was going to die. It was never viable until it lives 30 days. We never know that it's viable. We don't know that in the first place. So Gemara says, okay, that explains the machlokes very well when the animal was born healthy. But what about when the animal was born sick? It was treif from the moment it was born. According to the Rabbanan, why would that animal be tahor if you shechted while this animal is tamei? Gemara says, again, that animal is different. That is from a species, is from a type which is healthy. This animal was never from a type which is healthy because it was born and never lived 30 days, and therefore it does not count. Okay, now the Gemara tries to bring proofs as to whether anybody argues on Rav Shimon or not and what the halacha is. So first of all, we have a Mishnah that says a calf which is born on Yom Tov, you're allowed to slaughter it on Yom Tov. That sounds like you're allowed to slaughter and eat it the same day. That means it's not like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. So the Gemara says, no, that must be referring to a case where you knew for sure that it was born after its full gestational term. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel was talking about when it was a bit early and you didn't know that it was full, and it could have possibly at least been 8 months. The next price is referring to checking a bechar for amum. The halacha is in today's days, when you get a bechar animal, you have to leave it until it gets a mum. Once it gets a mum, it becomes removed from its kedusha, and you're allowed to slaughter it normally. The question is, can you check a bechar on Yom Tov and see if it gets a mum and then be allowed to slaughter? Or do we say, since it began Yom Tov in a bechar status and he couldn't slaughter it, it was mukta? So the Gemara here brings a brisa which says that everybody agrees that if the animal is born with a mum on it, then there is no problem, because from when it came into the world, it was already ready to be slaughtered because it has the mum already. But here you clearly see that it can be slaughtered on the day that it's born again. So Gemara says that's not a proof either. That's also talking about where you know that it was carried to full term. Okay, and the final proof here is a brisa that says Rav Yehuda. It's not a brisa, it's a statement. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, the halacha is like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. That indicates that there's somebody who argues about the halacha is like him. Okay, now we know that there is a machlokes, and now we need to narrow down what exactly the case of this machlokes is. And there are two options. One option is where the animal or the child was killed, something came and snuffed out its life. Are we concerned that it may not have lived, even had it been allowed to? That case would be if a lion came and ate it, or if it fell off a roof. That means that it could potentially have lived longer if not for something external that came and took its life force away. Is there machlokes in that case? Or the other case would be that it never really showed signs of life. All it did was yawn or hiccup once or twice, and that's it. It died. So which of these cases is the machlokes? So Abaye says that the case is where it yawned. If a lion came and ate it, so whether it's a person or it's a animal, we assume that it would have lived to full. We didn't get a chance to find out, but we have no reason to assume that it would have died had it not lived to the full 30 days. Now, it's dead anyway, so what's the difference? So the difference is, if it's a human child, the difference is there a yibum? That means, if it's a child that was born to a mother who had lost her husband, but her husband has a brother. So the halacha is that when a man dies without children, his wife has to marry his brother unless there's a child around. So is this child considered to be a real living child enough that his mother would not have to do yibum to marry her once husband's brother after he died? So if it would be a living child, she would not have yibum. If it would be not considered to be a viable child, then she would have to do yibum. In the case for an animal is if you slaughtered it. Slaughtering it is something that came and killed it. Does that mean that it is now kosher because you assume it would have lived, or does that mean that it's not kosher because you assume it would have died? So the Gemara has a problem. So we have Abaye who says that the entire machlokes is in the case where it yawned, but if something came and took its life away, then we would have assumed that it would have lived to full length. In that case, there's no machlokes. Rishon ben Gamliel would agree. So Gemara says, prove to you that it's not so. But we have an incident that happened where Papa and Rav Huna bar Rav Yeshua went to the household of Rav Idi bar Avin, and he served for them a calf, third-born calf, which is the highest quality, and it was on the 7th day of its life. And they said to him, this is beautiful, but we're not eating it because we don't know if it's kosher or not. It was slaughtered on the 7th day. Had you waited until nightfall, so it could have been at least into part of the 8th day, we could have said mixas yam kakule, it counts as the whole 8 days. Now we could have eaten it, but now we can't. So you see that even though something came and took the life away, there is still somebody out there who says that it's not kosher because we assume that it would have died. So Gemara says, you're right. So that case, there is no machlokes. The case of the machlokes is where something came and took its life force away. That's where there's an argument, and that's where at least there's one opinion that says that it would have lived, and there's one opinion that says it would have died, and therefore these Amoraim went with the one that says that it would have died. If, however, it yawned and it dropped dead, everybody agrees we assume it would not have lived. Okay, the Gemara has a couple of stories here. The Gemara says the son of Rav Dimi bar Yosef had a child, and the child was lost within 30 days, and his father, who was the son of Rav Dimi bar Yosef, was mourning. He was sitting shiva. So his father, Rav Dimi bar Yosef, the father of the father, came and he said to him, what are you sitting shiva for? You want to have the special meal, the special suda that Avelim have? It was within 30 days. You don't sit shiva for that. Within the 30 days, he's not going to live. So he said, no, because I happen to know for a fact that this child was carried to full term, and therefore 30 days or not is not an issue. Okay, another story is Rav Ashi went to the house of Rav Kahana, and something terrible happened. It was a tragedy. Within 30 days, a child died, and he saw Rav Kahana was mourning. He was sitting shiva. So he said, you don't hold like Rav Shimon? You don't hold like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, who says that he wasn't going to live anyway? Gemara says, no. He said back, I do hold like him, but I happen to know for a fact that this child was going to live because he was carried to full term. Now the Gemara has an interesting case. What happens if a man is married and he dies without children, and his wife gives birth after his death? And so now we're assuming there's no yibum because there's a child. And then somebody else goes and marries the woman because she didn't have any connection. She didn't have to do yibum. She didn't have to do chalitza. There was a child. Then the child went ahead and he died within 30 days of his birth. Now we don't know if he was a viable child or not. If he wasn't a viable child, then there was an obligation to do yibum and chalitza, and the marriage that the woman married somebody else doesn't count. So now what are you supposed to do? So Gemara says as follows. Gemara says, if the guy who married her is not a kohen, you don't have a problem, because let the brother do chalitza, and she can stay married to him. The problem is, what happens if he's a kohen? A kohen's not allowed to marry a chalitza, a woman who had chalitza. So that solution wouldn't help. So the Gemara quotes a machlokes here, what you're supposed to do. Mrs. Ravina says he can't do chalitza, she'll just have to stay married without chalitza. And Rav Shreva said, in the name of Rava, no, you do chalitza. worst comes to worst, the kohen will end up being married to a chalutza. Look, if she doesn't need chalitza, so then the chalitza is nothing. So the kohen's married to a woman that he's allowed to. If she did need chalitza, at least she's not married to an Eishes. She's not married, well, not an Eishes, but she's not, at least this man is not married to a woman who has a connection of Yibum that she's obligated to do Yibum to somebody else. It says that Ravina, who said otherwise, said to Rav Shravia, yeah, Rava said that at night, but by the next morning he had already changed his mind, and that's not what he holds. But Rav Shravia wasn't impressed. He said, if you permit this guy to stay married to her without chalitza, so your next thing you're going to do is permit people to eat chalev, the forbidden fats of an animal. Okay, that concludes this discussion. Now the Gemara goes back to the issue of a person with unclear gender. That means he's an androgynous, and therefore he has male and female characteristics, or he's a tumtum, which means the entire area is covered with a layer of flesh, and he can't tell what's there. So we had seen in our Mishnah that in the case of the androgynous, Rabbi Yehuda says he's obligated in a regular bris milah. An androgynous seems to be considered to be a male, even though he has female organs, and he is obligated in a full bris milah, and he gets kares if he doesn't do it. So Gemara says that's a halacha in milah. Rabbi Yehuda does not hold that an androgynous is a male across the board. He just holds that bris milah applies even to an androgynous. As far as other issues, he's not considered a male across the board. He's of unclear gender. How do you know this? Because if he was definitely a male, then if he did erchin, meaning if he made a vow to give money to the Beis HaMikdash equal to his erech, which is a specific amount for each age and gender of human being, so then he should have to give a clear erchin of a male, if he's clearly a male. But we have a brisa, it's a sifra, and Rabbi Yehuda is considered to be the author of all sifra without a name, where it says that an androgynous does not give erchin. He doesn't give the erech of a man, he doesn't give the erech of a woman, because he's neither. And it says zachar, it says erech of the zachar for a zachar, it says erech of nekeva for a nekeva, somebody who is not clear what he is, or if he's a mixture of the two, doesn't have erchin. So you see that Rabbi Yehuda holds that he's not clearly a zachar. He just, in Hilchos Bris Milah, it applies to an androgynous as well. The Gemara now shows, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, we see another brisa that leads us to a similar conclusion. Rav Yehuda is talking about putting the paraduma ashes into the water. The brisa says, Machokis, if a woman is allowed to do it or not. Rabbi Yehuda holds that a woman is not allowed to do it, and an androgynous is not allowed to do it either. Now, if an androgynous was clearly a man, he should be allowed to do it. So you see that Rabbi Yehuda holds that it's just in milah halacha. Now, where do you see in milah that he's allowed to do it? Why is there a special halacha that androgynous has a din of milah? So Gemara says, because the pasuk says himal chemikol zachar, it's an extra word there, and that includes even an androgynous.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.